Well, then let's get started. I picked some old songs that are not new, but they are, kind of. Anyways, we did this song back in a while ago at Friday Night Live. Here it is again. Enjoy. You can stay seated. Maybe you will remember. To your rest, Lord, the place where I belong. Hide me in your shadow, there's nothing more I want. Your grace is all around me, and falling like the rain. Lead me to the quiet, be my hiding place. Leave the world behind to follow you. I'm drawing closer, drawing closer. Time fades, but your love is forever. Jesus, Jesus, all of my heart, you have all of my life, it is yours, all I am for your cause. Though I stumble and fall, you will carry me home. Always in your sight, Jesus, shepherd of mine. Goodness and your mercy overwhelm my pain. I leave the world behind to follow you. I'm drawing closer, drawing closer. Time fades, but your love is forever. Jesus. Jesus, shepherd of mine.
the sound that saved a wretch like me. Was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see so clearly. Hallelujah, grace like rain falls down on me. Hallelujah, all my stains are washed away. They're washed away. Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. On precious day
subscribe, I'll let you know when to click. Proof. Sometimes, well, this is my idea with this devotion. Sometimes you're asked to defend what you believe, and a lot of times we aren't prepared to defend that because we don't get asked that often. I asked my dad, like 2 weeks ago, why he believes in God. He didn't have a great answer right on the spot. And I think that's because he hasn't been asked that in years, probably. So this one's for you, Dad. Next. That's a QR code. If you have an iPhone, you can scan that with your camera. You don't even need an app. If you have an Android, you'll need an app. But if you scan that, that will lead you to a link to this PowerPoint, which you can look at to zoom in on the pictures if you would like. It also provides notes and links to sources. Okie dokie. This devotion will essentially just be a discussion of certain archaeological evidences that we have that go along with the source that we have, known as the Bible. Things that agree. Next. You can hit the next slide, please. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So what this means is sometimes we don't have an exact example of an archaeological find for a specific act. For example, when I was in college, I had a class on the Old Testament, and my professor said that we don't have any proof that David was a king of Israel. We don't have any archaeological evidence. Okay, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't. It just means that we don't have that evidence yet, because it's from a long time ago. Okay, so just because we don't have this evidence doesn't mean that we have proof that doesn't exist. Just haven't found it yet. All right, let's look at the first one. These are the Dead Sea Scrolls. All right, so this is the oldest manuscript we have of the Bible, probably, that we found. And they've dated this to be pretty old, somewhere around the turn of the Common Era, I guess, around 3rd century BC to somewhere around like 100 years after Jesus. Not exactly sure. But this contains all but one book of the Torah and includes most of the major prophets and minor prophets. Notably, it doesn't contain the book of Esther, probably because it was found in the Qumran region, and in this area, those Jews didn't actually celebrate Purim, which is the holiday, which is, Esther is essentially an origin story for the holiday of Purim, so that might be one reason it wasn't included, but it still could have been around from that time. Let's see, these Dead Sea Scrolls actually that were found fairly recently have influenced some of our modern translations of the Bible. For example, in Psalm 153, they added a verse that they think was missing because it's the acrostic poem where they go through the Hebrew letters of the alphabet. And one of the letters was missing, and they found it in the Dead Sea Scrolls, so they added it back in. Also interesting is this contains the deuterocanonical books, like Shira, or Sirach, Tobit, Enoch, some books that the Catholics include in their Bible. Okay, next. This is a piece of rock. It has some chicken scratch above the hands. That's actually written in Hebrew, but this was uncovered, Hebrew. This was uncovered in the region of Samaria, so northern Israel. Samaria was the capital of northern Israel. And on this, it's actually inscribed. It says, "Be blessed by Yahweh and his Asherah." So this is really interesting because it's coming from Samaria. It kind of lines up with the book of 2 Kings where it talks about the northern kings of Israel and how there's a problem with Asherah worship coming up over and over and over again. So even though they're holding to the one God of Yahweh, the God that we worship still, not the God that Judah worshipped. They are also including their pagan worship. So that lines up with 2 Kings 17:10, for example. Let me read that. 2 Kings 17:10. Ever since the day I ordered judges to be over, that's not the right verse. That's the wrong book, that's why. 2 Chronicles 17:10 says, they set up for themselves sacred pillars and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every green tree. And this is under this section called Why Israel Fell. So there you have it. Next, the Mesha Stele. This is a big chunk of rock, again, with more writing on it. But this is probably this is the biggest text that we have from, like, before the Second Temple period, or right around that. This is kind of in between David and the sacking of the First Temple. So, it's a Moabite text, and the Moabites are included and described vividly in the 2 Kings again. And so if you look at this, there's brown regions of the rock and there's black regions. The black ones are the original artifact. The black ones are missing. They're not actually missing. When this thing was discovered, the people of the region broke it because they didn't want anyone to have it, and then they distributed the pieces all around to people in the area. So they've been having to buy all these pieces, piece by piece, to get it back together. But this actually has one of the probably first references to the house of David. So this is one of our first evidences that David was an important person. But this is actually contested because we only have Bet Vid, so we're missing the Dalet, which would indicate that they're talking about David there, because there's a crack wherever that letter's supposed to be. So that's one possibility, is that it's talking about the house of David. Or it could also be talking about the king of Balak, the king Balak, which is in Numbers 22. The Israelites traveled on and camped in the plains of Moab, near the Jordan, across from Jericho. Balak, son of Zippor, saw that all Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified of the people because they were numerous, and Moab dreaded the Israelites. So here we have a Moabite text talking about some people from the house of David, or the Jews, who were terrorizing them. Next, the Tel Dan Stele, another rock with writing on it. This one says the house of David perfectly legibly. So here we have the first reference of kind of the period where he was alive. So this is probably like 700 BC, 800 BC is when this was written. This one was found in the Israel region. And it also talks about Joram, the son of Ahab, of the house of David. So this is another king who's recorded in 2 Kings. 2 Kings 8:16. In the 5th year of Israel's king Joram, son of Ahab, Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, became king of Judah, replacing his father. Well, that's just a reference to the guy in the Bible, but same guy's reference on this rock that is 2,600 years old, or thereabouts. And you know it's a good source if even Wikipedia doesn't dispute that it's in agreement with the Bible, because Wikipedia loves to say that everything that could be related to the Bible is not. Okay, the next one. This is a seal called a bulla. They used it to seal envelopes or jars, containers like that. It's basically just a clay stamp. And this is the Bethlehem bulla, because it says Bethlehem, which is the city of David, and this is actually from around the time of David. It's a little bit closer to our time than David was, but it shows that the city was known as Bethlehem. It existed around the time that it was supposed to have. It at least existed during the First Temple period, and it existed in the region of Judah. But they actually dated this one to be around the reign of King Hezekiah or Manasseh or Josiah, because of, I don't know why. But this is actually the closest proof that we have to David in terms of chronology. Then the next one are these capitals that they dug up that are in pristine condition that they believe to be part of David's palace complex. They call them, so the design they call Proto-Aeolic. It's just the name of the time period, but that's the time period when David was supposed to have reigns, and they found it in the area where they expect his palace to have been. Those were just discovered in March of this year, actually. So that's a very new discovery, and there were 3 of them stacked one on top of each other. Next one. All right, this one is incredible. This is the Taylor Stone. It's a big rock, basically with a book written on it. It's called the Annals of Sennacherib because it lays out all the stories of Sennacherib, who was the king of Assyria, and he's mentioned in the Bible as well. He comes and lays siege to Jerusalem, but Israel is actually able to kind of escape their complete wrath because he's laying siege to Lachish at the same time as he's attacking Jerusalem, so his resources are kind of diverted. But this stone, there's 3 of them that they found, and they all have nearly exact wording, so they were careful in their transcriptions from one to the next. This is just one of the 3. This one's actually located in London. And this one talks about King Hezekiah of Israel. And it's written in cuneiform script, very tiny. So if we look at 2 Kings 18, or 2 Chronicles 32, or Isaiah 36 and 37, all 3 of these parts of the Bible will talk about the siege by the Assyrians led by Sennacherib. Next. Sennacherib built the biggest palace that had ever existed at this point, probably. And in his palace were all these reliefs all the way around this circular room. And they detailed all of his war achievements and stuff like that. And so this one actually depicts Judahite slaves, so that would be the Israelites. You can tell by their headgear. And because of the direction they're traveling towards Nineveh in the mural. And so they found most of these in nearly pristine condition, so these are really cool. They're huge, but this one is specifically mentioning, or specifically depicting, the Jews being captured by the Assyrians. Next. That is a big hole in rock. That's a tunnel underneath Israel we've known about for a long time. It was discovered in the 1600s. Well, this is actually Hezekiah's tunnel, or the Tunnel of Siloam. It's mentioned in 2 Kings 20:20. Kings 20:20. The rest of the events of Hezekiah's reign, along with all his might and how he made the pool and the tunnel and brought water into the city. So there's that tunnel, which they have dated to the First Temple period, Hezekiah's reign, and which does indeed carry water. Next. All right, so now we're moving a little bit closer forward in time towards us. This is the Caiaphas ossuary. So this is a box that holds the bones of someone important. You can tell it's someone important because of how decorative the box is. There's 5 circles within 2 larger circles, 6 circles within 2 larger circles. And people dispute that he's actually high priest because it's not said on the box that he's a high priest, but it has the name Caiaphas. And people just are assuming that it's a high priest because we know of someone else named Caiaphas from the Bible who was a high priest, and because of the fancy drawings. But if you look at the next one, you got deleted. There's another ossuary, the Miriam ossuary. Actually, no, I didn't include the picture. But there was an ossuary called the Miriam ossuary, and it was inscribed as Miriam, daughter of Yeshua, son of Caiaphas, which is from around the same time period, and that one actually does mention Caiaphas being a high priest. So we have 2 ossuaries referencing the same name from the time period, one that says high priest and one that doesn't. But that corresponds with the high priest who was supposed to have convicted Jesus in the Sanhedrin. All right, now the next one. Destruction of the first temple by Babylon. We have no archaeological evidence of this yet. But that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. It just means we don't know what happened yet because we haven't found it yet. Next. Slavery in Egypt and Exodus. If you Google archaeological evidence for the Exodus, you'll find a lot of articles that say there is none. But there are some pointers in that direction. So if you look at the next one. This is an old picture of a city that they unearthed in Egypt called Amarna. And this is a city that they date to the 20th dynasty of Egypt. And they somehow know that the city was built in a time frame of 2 years. Don't know how they know that, but they all agree on that. And it's also made out of mud bricks. And the mud bricks have very sparse amounts of straw in them, which sounds very similar to a certain story we know about the Exodus and the slaves of the Judahites in Israel, or in Egypt, I mean. So, that's a conjecture that we can draw from this little city, is that it was built by Hebrew slaves. How else do you build a city so fast with kind of improper materials in such a short amount of time? Next, this is a mass grave that they uncovered in that same city with children in it. And they also found evidence of abuse of these people in these graves, like trauma to the head and stuff like that. So this is mass graves in the city that we think might have been constructed by the Jews. And this improper burial just points to these being kind of third-class citizens, because in Egypt they took burial very seriously. These people weren't even given individual graves for themselves. Next, this is kind of a boring one. It's called the Onomasticon of Amenepi. It's basically just a papyrus that has a bunch of names of people and towns on it. It's Egyptian. But what's interesting is that it has the name Pithom on it, which is a Hebrew word and not an Egyptian word. And Pithom is in Exodus 1:11. What it says over there, it says they're in Ramses and Pithom. And so Pithom was probably a name that the Jews gave to this area, and it ended up sticking later on into this dynasty, because they think that the Jews were probably there in the 18th dynasty or the 20th dynasty, that kind of range. Okay, you can go to the next one. All right, those are, count them, 14 archaeological evidences that the scripture is reliable. So if you didn't get a chance to scan it, you can scan that now.